tidy, genteel figure in Robin Page. I see a hero, and I think he is a hero. I think it's people like Robin who make the world a better place. And I think if we get out of some of the mess that we're in today, it will be down to people like Robin Page, who's just done the most extraordinary work. The CRT is clearly Robin's creation. It wouldn't exist without him. And it is an amazing story. You got a glimpse of it up here. I want to quote something that I read in The Lady. It's a magazine I subscribe to religiously, of course. It was an article written by Robin. He said, "It started on a hot summer day a few years before that fateful day in 1993. I was confronted with something strange for that time of the year. Silence, an almost deafening silence. Something was wrong. I should have been hearing bird song over farmland, lark song, a very special summer song, but there was nothing, just silence." This was 25, 26 years ago, and as you will all know, the trends since then have gone exactly in the wrong direction. We have denuded our countryside to almost on an industrial scale. So if things were bad in 1992, 1993, they're a whole lot worse today. So Robin took his friend, the brilliant artist and conservationist, sadly the late Gordon Benningfield, to the HQ of the RSPB. I hope there's no one here from the RSPB, so I'm going to be critical now. And off they went, and their job, his ambition simply was to make the case that the RSPB ought to be showing farmers how to farm in a way that would not only produce food, but that would also boost wildlife and benefit biodiversity. And as you might not be surprised to hear, they were sent packing. RSPB at the time were very clear that you had farming and food production on one side, and nature was very much for the reserves, and the two were quite separate. So Robin took it upon himself to do the job himself, and that was when the CRT was born. And it started with 20 acres at Lark Rise Farm, which I think was paid for following an appeal in the Telegraph. So it was the readers of the Telegraph who paid for those first 20 acres, I think. Anyway, it began very, very small, and it grew, that farm, to 450 acres. And I'm sure lots of you are here today because you've been inspired by going to Lark Rise Farm. I was inspired when I went there years and years ago, and so much has happened since then. It has been through the most extraordinary transformation. It was a hedgeless, cereal monoculture, giant fields, and it's now a stunning landscape made up of small fields, each divided by the grass margins that you just saw, the beetle banks and hedgerows. In fact, the hedgerows are so impressive that last Saturday, the National Hedge-laying Championship was held at Lark Rise Farm. That just testimony to what has grown out of literally nothing in the time that Robin has been the custodian of that farm. And if you're lucky enough to spend any time at the farm, there's a reasonable chance you'll see skylarks, barn owls, grey partridges, otters, water voles, orchids, and much, much more. Tony Juniper, I don't know if he's here today, he's a great figure in my view. He's now one of the directors of WWF. He was a director of the Wildlife Trust. He's an advisor to Prince Charles. He's sort of been everywhere and committed his life to restoring the natural world. He said, after going to Lark Rise, he said, "By farming as it does at Lark Rise Farm, the Countryside Restoration Trust has already given us a farming blueprint for the future." And I think that is absolutely key. It began on Lark Rise Farm 25 years ago. There are now 15 farms all around the country. And among them, you have education centres of the sort that we just saw at the end of the film. And I think that is massively important. We live in a world where children have no idea where their food comes from. They have no idea about the joys of even being outdoors. Someone last year, I don't know who it was, worked out that a child today is 3 times more likely to end up in hospital as a result of falling out of bed than falling out of a tree. I mean, what is the point of childhood? I spent my entire life up trees, and I spent a few days of that life in hospital as a consequence. But it just seems to me that we're stripping nature of its value. We're stripping children of their childhood. 7 hours a day is the amount of time an average child today spends on a screen, on gadgets, on iPhones and smartphones and the works. So I don't think we can be surprised that 1/3 of children today are overweight. I also don't think we can be surprised that there aren't enough people in our country, or indeed beyond this country, who are committed to restoring nature in the way that we've seen Robin achieve on Lark Rise, but also other farms as well. The good news, this is why I'm going to part company with Robin briefly. The good news is that even while for years Robin has been seen as a sort of crazy maverick outsider, outlandishly blunt and sometimes even rude in the pursuit of his aims, DEFRA, sometimes, not always, DEFRA, that has been so far behind the curve for so many years, seems finally actually to be catching up. I think you might agree with that. It's finally beginning to talk the language of the CRT. And that's partly, and I hate to bring this in, it's such a toxic issue, but it is partly as a consequence of Brexit. Because if we do Brexit right, there is going to be a gigantic green dividend. I say if, because we could also get it very wrong, but if we get it right, there will be a gigantic green dividend from Brexit. And the irony is that until the referendum, many people in the green movement, people I worked with when I ran the Ecologist magazine for 10 years, were absolutely committed, at the very least, to radical reform of the European Union. They could see that the common agriculture policy was a disaster. They could see that the common fisheries policy was a disaster. They could see that the very structure of the European Union lent itself to lobbying, successful lobbying by very large vested interests of the sort that absolutely opposed the kind of progress that we've seen on CRT land. I remember sharing a platform with Caroline Lucas and Jenny Jones of the Green Party, calling for a referendum so that people would have an opportunity to make the decision they ultimately made, with a view to achieving that green dividend. That was then, of course, and things have changed since, and many of the same people are asking for another referendum, but that's another issue. But it is, of course, possible that Brexit will provide us with that green dividend. There are things that we can do that we can't currently do. We can completely reform the way the common agriculture policy is organized. We spend about £4 billion a year currently. That money is dished out mostly to landowners simply on the basis that they own land, no matter what they do with that land. So you can despoil your land. You can put pollution in your land, which will end up in water system further downstream. You can manage land in a way that exacerbates flooding or even drought, and you'll still get your share of the cap. Well, we can change that now. That money can now be spent, can be made conditional, 100% conditional on good stewardship of the land. We can raise the standards, environmental standards, but we can also boost our rural economy at the same time. At root, we can use that reformed CAP to support the kind of stuff that Robin Page and the CRT have been pioneering. Now, I began by saying that Robin is a hero, and I really do believe that. I was joking about the dapper bit of it. He's not dapper. He's whatever the opposite of dapper, that's Robin Page. But he is a hero. He knows how to put complicated issues into a language which everyone can understand. I was inspired by his book, I don't know if it was his first book, 26 years ago. I read, well, I'm not that old. I wasn't even born 45 years ago. But I read it 25 years ago, and I was absolutely inspired by this book. And I remember hearing Robin speak about a year after having read the book, and I didn't realize he was the same person who'd written that book. It was only after I'd heard the speech, which was wonderful, that I put two and two together and hunted him down, tracked him down, and the rest is history. I've been involved from a distance. I've been involved with the CRT ever since. But I think it's his ability to convey complex messages so simply. It's probably why we see him so often on the BBC, why he's such a regular face on that wonderful organization. But more importantly, Robin has been indescribably brave in pursuing his ambition for the CRT. You might even say it was reckless. If he was a business executive, he'd have been fired years and years ago for taking the kinds of risks he did to build up the CRT. He's taken gigantic personal risks. There's been no upside for him at all, no material upside for him at all. He's risked over and over and over again everything he has to grow this organization into what it has become. And I think we can all be massively grateful to him and to fate that it paid off, because it has made this country a richer place. Because of him, we have a holding bank of living, breathing knowledge and skills. He's shown us not only how to reconcile farming with the natural world, but why we absolutely have to do that across the board. Prince Charles, Robin is one of the least establishment figures I've ever come across in my life, but Prince Charles, being the pinnacle of the establishment, is as much of a fan as Robin Page as I am. And he once said, "Lark Rise Farm is the embodiment of a vision that matters to us all." So I very simply want to thank you all for backing that vision, helping Robin make it a reality. As he said when we were walking in, this is the CRT. And he's right, you are the CRT. You've helped him make this dream a reality. And I want to thank Robin for absolutely everything you've done for us, for nature, for farming, for the world. Thank you.